So a little over a month ago, the people at SetPower reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in reviewing their X50 12-volt 50-quart fridge freezer. And I looked at the specs online, and it seemed to have a couple of cool tricks up its sleeve. So I thought it might be worth a look. So the question is it worth a look for you? Let's find out. Now this particular model, as I mentioned, is a 50 quart, but it is also a single zone refrigerator or freezer, which means that it's either a refrigerator or a freezer, but not both. So it's not a dual zone climate control. And I have a 48 quart dual zone refrigerator freezer combo. Now your needs may be different than mine, but I find personally that I just typically don't bother with the freezer part. So I like the fact that I'm not actually sacrificing a little bit of the usable space with the dual zone. Now the dimensions on this thing are very important to know. This particular model is 15 inches sort of deep in this direction, and it's 24 inches from handle to handle on the width side of it. And as far as height goes, it's about 23 inches high. And when I actually picked this one, because the folks at SetPower actually allowed me to choose which refrigerator I wanted to review. And I thought, since it's a little bit narrower than the 48 quart that I have, that it might actually sit behind the front seat on the footwell or the floor in the middle row. But as it turns out, well, you'll see how it turns out. Yeah, as you can see, my original plan was deeply flawed. As it turns out, it's not just this distance here, which is a little wider or deeper than I would have guessed. And especially because of the wheels on this unit, which can probably be removed. But you can see I would maybe just barely fit this back here. So, at least in a 2021 Honda Pilot, this is not really suitable for kind of a behind the seats thing. Even if you remove the wheels, I suspect it's a problem. So if you have a larger SUV like a Suburban, you may be able to get by with this, but you know, had I really just looked up the dimensions, I could have saved myself this particular little misstep. But as it was, I was able to put the refrigerator in the back of the car. Much more doable. You do have to kind of pull it forward. So in other words, if you recess it back here a little ways, you kind of run into this where it's kind of hard to see what you're getting. And for a while I had it actually positioned sort of back in this kind of orientation, but then again, that also made it kind of very difficult to see what I was trying to get. So at least for me, the easiest way to use this was to kind of pull it into the back and make sure that whenever I needed to get into it, I just sort of pulled it all the way toward the opening, and that allowed me, if I do that right now, that allowed me to fairly easily open up the lid easily enough that I can then see inside to easily see what it is that I'm trying to grab. So it was easy enough to use in that particular orientation. Now SetPower does offer a bunch of different configurations for these portable refrigerator freezers. And you can get dual zone if that's your jam. And you can get ones with and without wheels and ones with and without an auxiliary battery pack. Now I was very eager to try the battery pack option on this refrigerator because I don't really need the battery pack option because I am literally swimming in power stations, as you might guess. But I wanted to see how convenient having the battery integrated into the refrigerator was, and I was actually delightfully surprised at how well this little battery pack does. This battery is just slightly under 188 watt hours in capacity, but it does surprisingly good job at powering this thing in refrigerator or freezer mode. And I was actually shocked at how much runtime I could actually get. Now on SetPower's website, which is down in the description below, it's SetPower USA, not setpower.com, but setpowerusa.com. On their website, they say that this battery will let the refrigerator run strictly off battery for 8 hours. And what I have found is that is a gross underestimation of actually what you can get out of this. Now, running the refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit in an environment that was 72 degrees ambient temperature, I was able to get 32 hours or very close to 32 hours of runtime in those particular conditions. And if I ran it in freezer mode at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, I was able to get upwards of 12 hours or very close to 12 hours of runtime with this battery when it was full. And so that's significantly better than the 8 hours they actually claim. Now, if you happen to be running at an ambient temperature, let's say 95 degrees or maybe 100 degrees in the car, that is going to probably chop that number in half. So in refrigerator mode, let's say you're running 37 degrees in refrigerator mode. So let's say you're running inside of a hot car at maybe 100 degrees. Instead of getting 32 hours, you might get something like 16 to 18 hours, which is still quite a significant amount of runtime. So I remain very impressed with that. Now, my wife and I actually did take this on a road trip up to the northeastern United States, up in Maine and New Hampshire, for a lot of day hiking and that kind of thing. And this thing really performed well, despite the fact that we even had record temperatures. So inside the car, it was very hot. But for day hiking, going out and hiking 2 or 3 or 4 miles, coming back, so this thing is running off strictly battery power for the time that for the few hours we're out day hiking, and then coming back, letting it charge as we commute to our next hike, was quite a good use case for this thing. All right, just finished about a 4-mile hike, actually, total round trip. Yep. So big advantage having a refrigerator, not just a cooler. But look at the condensation on that. Ice cold. That is definitely gonna hit the spot. So thumbs up on the SetPower. And another use case that I've really found very handy with this, and you could do this with the power station as well, but it does work with something as small as this, is making trips, supply runs to the store. You go to Costco and fill this thing up with stuff that either needs to be refrigerated or frozen, and maybe you've got a few other stops to make. Well, you don't have to worry about when you turn the car off, this thing shutting off because it's no longer getting power from your car, or draining your car battery if you happen to have one of those hot 12-volt systems that does power 12-volt appliances when your car is off. Now, this thing does have a 3-stage or 3 levels of protection for your car battery if you do run it off of your car battery without your engine running. So that's pretty cool. It'll actually shut itself off if the voltage reading off your car battery starts dropping below a particular threshold. So that functionality is already built in. You don't need to buy an extra piece for that. But if you have something like this, you don't really need to worry about it. You just stop running it off the 12 volt when you shut your car off, and it runs off the battery automatically. So I was very happy with this battery option, and I think that $130 for a 188 watt hour battery is actually pretty reasonable. By the way, if you're finding any of this information useful at all, I would really appreciate it if you consider giving me a thumbs up on the video. It really does help. But enough of that. Let's get back to the video. Now, one of the tests I ran on this was to see how well it is insulated. So if it runs out of power, or if you happen to unplug it from the car, and maybe you don't have a battery to plug it into, how well does it hold its temperature? And I didn't have this thing full, so there wasn't really very much thermal mass in there. And at 13.5 degrees Fahrenheit, once I pulled power, I checked it 2 hours later, and that temperature had risen by 22 degrees. And then after 4 hours had elapsed, the total temperature change had been about 34 degrees Fahrenheit gain. So that should tell you a little bit about how it insulates. So not probably the best insulating performance that you're going to find on the market, but definitely not the worst. I also ran some average power consumption tests on this. And what I found was that at least at 72 degrees ambient temperature, if you run this in sort of what I would call refrigerator mode at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, which is kind of typical, I was averaging about 6.9 watts of consumption per hour. And if I ran this in freezer mode at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, I was averaging about 17.8 watts per hour of consumption. Now, typically, because these things are very economical in terms of power consumption, I like to say that you can run them off of something as small as a 300 watt power station. Now, the problem with that is something like the Rockpals, for example, doesn't have enough peak capacity in its inverter to start up. So the Rockpals 300 power station will actually trip overcurrent and just shut down on you. So it will not run this refrigerator. And that's the same with my other 12 volt refrigerators as well. But the new Bouge RV Flash 300 power station, which I'm going to be doing a review on soon, actually can run this thing no problem. It can handle that spike when the compressor first comes on. Also, the new Bluetti EB3A, which I'll be reviewing in a few weeks, can also handle this thing at startup as well. Even though both the Bluetti and the Bouge RV Flash 300 are both fairly low capacity power stations, but they have an upgraded inverter that allows it to handle something like a 12 volt fridge when that compressor causes that power draw spike when it first kicks on. So don't try to run this with something like a Rockpals 300. But if you go the Bouge RV 300 route or the Bluetti EB3A, no problem at all with those smaller capacity power stations. One thing I'll point out is the compressor on this is actually mounted up here fairly high up, which makes it a little bit top heavy. So if you have this thing empty and you don't have it strapped down at all, and by the way, there are tie downs in the back. There's also bottle openers in the back, which is kind of cool. But if you don't have it tied down, you may tip this thing over when you take a sharp turn. But once you have, cans of soft drinks or some stuff that's got some decent weight in the bottom, that top heaviness becomes a non-issue, and it's perfectly stable. By the way, with the compressor running, sitting right at 50 dB, at least when I don't talk. So I would call that pretty quiet. And speaking of the compressor, there is a 3-year warranty on the compressor. The rest of the parts in this unit are warranted for 1 year, but the compressor itself, which is obviously the most important component, has got a 3-year warranty on it. Now let's talk about some pros and cons, because there are both pros and cons. I will say up front, the pros pretty significantly outweigh the cons, but let's talk about what they are. So the pros that I found on this unit are the fact that it's got the wireless Qi charging and it's got USB charging as well, and that's particularly handy if you've got this optional battery pack. As you can see, you just lay your phone down on there. You could charge a second phone through the USB port, or in my case, I could charge my my GoPro and my Volta handle. And I just like having that option right there integrated into the refrigerator. And this XT50 in particular has this extra deep storage, so it gives you more vertical space. It really allows you to pile the stuff in. So putting 2-liter bottles in there, not a problem. Large bottles of wine, not a problem. I don't know how I know that. Don't ask. But anyway, yeah, you can put a lot of stuff in this refrigerator, and I'm very impressed with the capacity. If I didn't mention it before, it does have an interior LED light, so that's really handy. So you open the lid, the LED comes on automatically and allows you to see inside. I like the fact that it's got an integrated bottle opener in the back. A lot of refrigerators do have this now. Not all of them do, but the ones that do, I really appreciate those little touches, because how many times have you found yourself either at out in the cabin or out car camping, and you need a bottle opener, and oh, I forgot my bottle opener. Well, you don't have to worry about that. It's also got these 6-inch wheels in the back and a telescoping handle. It's a nice tall telescoping handle. So this could be a pro or a con. So this may not be the unit for you if you want to put this in like a teardrop camper. It's probably, the dimensions are probably not going to work for you. If you've got a family party or a family reunion or some big outdoor shindig, you got to take this thing on and you want to remove it from your car over to where the action is at. Having the telescopic handle and the wheels is very handy, because when you load this thing up, it's upwards, it can be upwards of 90 pounds or so. So it can be quite heavy. And having this nice telescopic handle and the wheels makes moving it relatively trivial. I already mentioned the car battery protection, the 3 levels of car battery protection, but that's something I would call a pro. But let's talk about some cons. And not all of these are going to be cons for everybody. Now, so the height on this is going to be a con for you, again, if you're trying to put this in a teardrop galley. It's just probably not going to work. Another possible con is that since this is a single zone, if you needed both refrigerator and freezer functionality at the same time, this is probably not the model for you. But as I said, SetPower has several other dual zone refrigerator options as well, so you can check those out if that's more your speed. And I also mentioned that this can be a little bit top heavy because the compressor is up high if you don't have it loaded up with some some soft drinks and things like that. But once you put even just like a 12-pack in there, it already is so much more stable. And if you do need to tie it down, it does have those tie down brackets in the back, so that kind of alleviates that problem. So that's kind of a petty con in my opinion. So I feel confident recommending this unit if you're in the market for something like this. I think the build quality is very good, and I think its performance was right on par with what I would expect for a refrigerator in this price range. And that's about all I got for you. Hopefully you found some of this information useful. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And consider subscribing if you're not already a subscriber. Anyway, that's all I've got, as I said, and hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have fun out there. Now, your needs may be quite different than mine, but I find that I just Now, your needs may will allow the refrigerator to cool itself for up to 8. Now, I also did rent. No.